The Two Kettles, Chapter 1, The Ritual of Echoes. Every Sunday evening, without fail, the kitchen in Evelyn Evie Ramsey's cozy Seattle suburb home hummed with a quiet, poignant ritual. She would walk to the stove, her steps a little slower, now at 70, and carefully place two kettles on the burners. One, her own old, dented copper kettle, a faithful companion through countless cups of chamomile tea. The other, a gleaming, new stainless steel kettle, a thoughtful gift from her son, James, after David had passed. One for her, one for him. For David, her husband, who had been gone for 5 long years. She'd fill her kettle with fresh water, waiting for the familiar, gentle whistle. For David's, she'd simply pour boiling water from her own, imagining the robust steam that would rise from his beloved strong black tea, just as he had prepared it every evening. This ritual was her anchor, a fragile lifeline tethering her to his presence, a desperate, tender defiance against the piercing silence of her solitude. It was her way of keeping him alive, of preventing the world from forgetting him, of preventing herself from forgetting the rhythm of their life together. Her son, James, now in his 40s, and her dear friend Helen watched her with concern. They saw the quiet retreat, the gentle clinging to the past, the subtle, almost imperceptible, drifting into a world where only she and David existed. They urged her to move on, to join a book club, to take a class, to simply live. But Evie couldn't, not yet. David had left so suddenly, so abruptly. A fishing accident, they said. A rogue wave. A tragic, senseless twist of fate on a calm autumn day 5 years ago. There had been no goodbyes, no final words, no lingering touch. Only a phone call, shattering her world into a million irreparable pieces. And the unspoken secret, the gnawing regret that festered beneath her carefully constructed calm. In the days leading up to his death, David had been different, distant, troubled. He had spent hours locked away in his study, late into the night, muttering about finding it and the legacy. He had been hiding something, his movements furtive, his eyes clouded with an unusual intensity. Evie had sensed his unease, felt the shift in their shared rhythm, but she hadn't pressed him. She had given him space, respected his privacy, a silent promise to discuss it later. Later never came. Now, that silent space screamed with accusation. What had he been hiding? Was he in danger? Was his death truly an accident? The ritual of the two kettles wasn't just a way to keep him close. It was her desperate plea to the universe for answers, a quiet vigil until she could uncover the truth behind his last, unspoken days. The hot steam from her kettle rose, mingling with the phantom steam from his, two quiet echoes in a silent house, waiting for a truth that promised to both shatter and heal. Chapter 2, The Whispers in the Study. The ritual of the two kettles, once a comforting routine, now felt like a fervent prayer, a desperate plea for answers. Evie knew she couldn't simply move on, not with the persistent whisper of doubt in her heart. David had been a man of quiet habits, meticulous in his ways, yet in those final days, a restless energy had consumed him. He had spent hours in his study, the door often closed, the faint hum of his old desktop computer a constant companion. Determined to find the truth, Evie began the daunting task of sorting through his study. It was a space David had always meticulously organized, his books alphabetized, his papers neatly stacked. But now she found a subtle disarray, a hint of frantic searching. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the curtains, illuminating the layers of untouched time. She started with his desk, a heavy oak piece that had been his grandfather's. In a hidden compartment beneath a stack of old engineering schematics, she found it, a small, leather-bound box, exquisitely carved and locked. David had carried a similar box with him everywhere when they were first married, a sentimental piece he claimed contained family keepsakes. This was larger, more ornate, and unfamiliar. He had never mentioned this one. Her heart pounded. This had to be it, the thing he was hiding. With trembling fingers, Evie fumbled with an old hairpin, a trick David had taught her years ago to pick simple locks. The tiny click echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not money or jewelry, but a small, tarnished silver compass, its needle frozen, pointing nowhere. Beside it lay a small, hand-bound notebook with a dark, worn leather cover, its pages yellowed with age. And tucked within its pages were several brittle, handwritten letters, dated from the last few months of David's life. Evie pulled out the notebook first. It was a journal of sorts, but cryptic, filled with what looked like a mixture of personal reflections, historical notes, and strange, arcane symbols. David's familiar, precise handwriting filled the pages, but the words themselves were a puzzle. He wrote of the search, the legacy, the forgotten truth, and a covenant he needed to find. He mentioned his grandfather, a man Evie knew only through faded photographs and whispered legends of being an adventurer or an amateur historian who had disappeared decades ago. David's connection to his grandfather had always been something he rarely spoke of, almost as if it were a private, sacred wound. The letters, even more perplexing, were addressed to himself, musings on history and destiny, with fragmented references to specific locations around Seattle. An old lighthouse, a forgotten ferry landing, a specific old-growth tree in a distant park. He spoke of the others who were also seeking and expressed a growing sense of urgency, even fear. "I feel their eyes on me," one letter read, dated just a week before his death. "They are close. The truth must be uncovered before it is lost forever." Evie reread the words, a cold dread creeping into her heart. They are close. Lost forever. This was no ordinary research. David had been pursuing something far grander, far more dangerous than a historical curiosity. His accident now seemed less like chance and more like a grim possibility. The whispers in the study were no longer just the echoes of David's past. They were the terrifying whispers of a truth that had consumed him and now threatened to consume her. Chapter 3. The Unlikely Ally. The cryptic contents of David's journal and letters consumed Evie. They spoke of a search, a legacy, a hidden truth connected to his enigmatic grandfather, a man shrouded in legend and whispers of obsession. The phrases, "they are close," and "the truth must be uncovered before it is lost forever," chilled her to the bone. David's death, once a tragedy, now felt like a piece of a larger, terrifying puzzle. Evie, however, was no detective. The old maps, the strange symbols, the fragmented historical references felt like a foreign language. Her son, James, for all his love, would likely dismiss it as his father's eccentricities, or perhaps a sign of her own unraveling grief. Helen, her kind friend, would worry. She needed help, a fresh perspective, someone who wouldn't judge or dismiss. As if by providence, Lily arrived. Lily, a vibrant young woman in her late 20s, was a volunteer from the local food bank who regularly brought groceries to Evie. She was bright, inquisitive, with a kindness that shone through her easy smile. She had recently lost her own grandmother and seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of Evie's quiet solitude. One sunny afternoon, Lily delivered a box of fresh produce, her eyes catching the open journal on David's desk. "Oh," she said, her voice soft. "Is this a family heirloom? It looks fascinating." Hesitantly, Evie explained. Not the full, terrifying implications, but enough to pique Lily's curiosity. She mentioned David's interest in history, his grandfather's mysterious past. Lily, whose own passion was historical research and solving puzzles, immediately offered to help. "I love a good mystery, Evie," she said, her eyes sparkling, "and I'm good at digging through old texts. Maybe I can help you make sense of his notes." Evie, initially wary of inviting someone so young into her carefully guarded world of grief and secrets, found herself saying yes. Lily's energy was infectious, her enthusiasm a small hesitant spark in Evie's shadowed world. Together, they began to decipher David's cryptic entries. Lily's keen eye for detail and her internet research skills proved invaluable. They cross-referenced names, dates, and locations. David's notes consistently led them to historical societies, obscure local archives, and even the dusty back rooms of old Seattle bookstores. They discovered that David's grandfather, a man named Arthur Vance, had indeed been an amateur historian, but with a specific, almost obsessive focus on the early founding of Seattle. He had been convinced that a significant historical injustice had been committed during the city's early days. A grand deception covered up by powerful figures. He spoke of the missing treaty, the stolen land, and a legacy of silence that needed to be broken. It seemed he had vanished while on the brink of uncovering this truth. David, it became clear, had not merely been reminiscing about his grandfather. He had picked up where Arthur Vance left off, driven by a profound sense of duty and a thirst for justice. He had become consumed by this hunt, dedicating years to deciphering his grandfather's scattered notes, following the same elusive trail. The small silver compass, Evie now realized, was not just a trinket. It was an exact replica of the compass Arthur Vance had carried and was hinted at in David's notes as a potential key or guide. As they delved deeper, they found David's most recent letters to himself, written in his final weeks. They spoke of urgency, of closing in on the truth, and a growing sense of paranoia. "I am close," one read, dated just 2 days before his death. "But I fear I am not alone in this pursuit. The shadows are long, and they move faster than I thought. I have found the key. It is hidden where we dreamed, where we made our covenant." "Where we dreamed," Lily mused, looking up from the page, her brow furrowed. What could that mean, Evie? Evie's heart leaped, a flash of memory, so vivid it brought a lump to her throat. The old oak tree in their backyard, the one they had planted together when they first moved into the house. Beneath it, years ago, they had buried a small time capsule filled with their hopes and dreams for their new life together. A covenant. That was it. The key was in their own backyard, in a place steeped in their shared love, not in some distant historical archive. The puzzle was almost complete, and an unlikely ally had guided her to the precipice of David's final, profound secret. Chapter 4. The Time Capsule of Secrets. The words, "where we dreamed, where we made our covenant," echoed in Evie's mind, a poignant, almost unbearably intimate clue. The old oak tree, the time capsule. It was so perfectly David, to hide his final, most crucial discovery in a place so deeply personal, so intertwined with their shared history. He had trusted her, even in his secrecy, to find the truth he had dedicated his last days to uncovering. Evie and Lily, now bound by a shared sense of mission and a growing friendship, went to the backyard. The oak tree stood majestic, its branches spreading wide, a silent guardian of their past. Beneath its ancient roots, they began to dig, carefully, reverently. The soil was soft, fragrant with damp earth and fallen leaves. After a few minutes, Lily's trowel scraped against something hard. "Got it!" she exclaimed, her voice hushed with excitement. It was a small, tarnished metal box, the one they had buried together over 40 years ago. Evie's hands trembled as she lifted it, brushing away the dirt. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed letters, a faded photograph of their wedding day, and a tiny, tarnished baby shoe, was a small, exquisitely carved wooden box. David had made it himself, a gift for Evie, never revealing its purpose. He had clearly added it to the time capsule later, probably in those last frantic weeks. With trembling fingers, Evie opened the wooden box. It wasn't treasure, not in the traditional sense. Inside lay a single, brittle, parchment-like map, incredibly old, intricately drawn, and covered in faded script. Beside it was a small, intricately carved wooden figure, a totem of sorts. Clearly Native American in origin. Lily, her eyes wide, recognized the symbols on the map. "Evie," she whispered, "this looks like a historical survey map, and these symbols, they're from the local Coast Salish tribes. It's an original, perhaps even pre-settlement." The map, when unrolled, revealed a specific parcel of land on the edge of what was now a developing suburban area. Land that, according to the map, was designated as a sacred burial ground and traditional fishing territory. The script on the map detailed original agreements, tribal signatures, and early pioneer names. And then, a clear, damning truth. The land had been illegally seized, the original treaty disregarded, and the Native American community dispossessed of their ancestral grounds. A carefully constructed lie, buried for over a century, allowed the city to flourish on stolen land. David's journal entries, now read in conjunction with the map, suddenly made terrifying sense. The legacy of silence, the stolen land, the others who seek. He wasn't just an amateur historian. He was a truth seeker, trying to right a century-old wrong. His grandfather, Arthur Vance, had been attempting to expose this very injustice when he vanished. David, haunted by his grandfather's disappearance and his own sense of justice, had picked up the torch. The wooden figure, the totem, seemed to be a key to the map, perhaps confirming its authenticity or pointing to an elder who held the true oral history. David had been gathering all the pieces. A new, chilling possibility settled over Evie. David's accident. In his letters, he mentioned feeling watched, that the shadows are long and they move faster than I thought. Could his death have been no accident at all? Could the powerful interests who benefited from this historical deception have silenced him? Just as they had silenced his grandfather, Evie remembered Michael, David's old fishing buddy, who had been with him on that last fatal trip. Michael had been unusually withdrawn since David's death, refusing to talk about the trip in detail, his eyes always haunted. He had seemed devastated, but also strangely evasive. He had to know something. The time capsule had revealed not just a historical secret, but the chilling possibility that David's death was directly tied to his noble, dangerous quest for truth. Evie knew she had to find Michael. The love and memory she had kept alive with two kettles now demanded justice and perhaps vengeance. Chapter 5: The Unspoken Truth on the Water's Edge. The map from the time capsule, revealing the historical injustice of stolen ancestral lands, had transformed Evie's grief into a burning resolve. David hadn't merely been indulging a hobby. He had been a guardian of truth, unraveling a century-old deception. And his death, Evie now believed with a terrifying certainty, was no accident. The path led directly to Michael, David's old fishing buddy, the only other person on the boat that fateful day. Evie called Michael, her voice firm, resolute. He sounded surprised, then hesitant. He tried to politely deflect, mumbling about grief and needing space. But Evie persisted, her voice unwavering. "Michael, I know about the map. I know about David's grandfather. I know he was looking for something. And I think you know what happened." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Michael's voice, raw and strained, broke through. "Evie, I can't talk about it over the phone. Meet me. The old fishing dock where we always launched. Tomorrow at sunrise." The next morning, the air was crisp, the Puget Sound still and shimmering under the nascent light. Evie, accompanied by Lily, who insisted on being there, found Michael standing by his weathered fishing boat, his back to them, his shoulders hunched. He looked older, gaunter, haunted by an invisible weight. He turned as they approached, his eyes bloodshot, his face etched with a profound, agonizing guilt. "Evie," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I should have told you." He recounted the events of that day, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anguish. David was agitated. He had something with him, a small, wrapped parcel. He said he was meeting someone who also knew about the legacy. He was going to show them proof, he said, something that would change everything. Michael's eyes filled with tears. We were out on the Sound, near the old lighthouse. A boat approached. Not a fishing boat, a sleek, fast yacht. 2 men on board, suits. They seemed angry. David was trying to hand them the parcel. He was arguing with them. He said he wouldn't let them silence the truth. Then his voice cracked. One of them, he shoved David hard. David lost his balance, hit his head on the side of the boat, and fell into the water. It was so fast. I tried to reach him, but the currents, they were strong. And the men, they just watched. Then they sped off. They took the parcel with them. They left me there, paralyzed with shock. I was so scared, Evie. They threatened me, said if I ever spoke a word, my family would pay. Michael broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't an accident, Evie. It was murder. They stole David's proof. They murdered him to keep the truth buried. Evie felt a cold, hard knot of grief and rage tighten in her chest. Her husband, her quiet, steadfast David, had been murdered, not by fate, but by powerful, ruthless men determined to silence a century-old truth. The others David had spoken of in his letters, the shadows he felt following him, were real, and they had taken him from her. The wooden totem from the time capsule suddenly gained a terrifying significance. It was a key, not just to the map, but to a hidden truth that certain powerful families in Seattle had desperately tried to suppress for generations. The map itself, a copy of the original treaty, was the definitive proof of the stolen land. David had found it. He was going to expose them, and they had killed him for it. The ritual of the 2 kettles now burned with a new, fierce purpose. It was no longer just about grief, it was about justice. David's legacy, the truth he died for, would not remain buried. Evie, armed with Michael's testimony, Lily's unwavering support, and the undeniable evidence of the map and the totem, was ready to fight. The unspoken truth on the water's edge had finally been voiced, and its echoes would shatter the silence of the powerful, finally bringing justice to a man who had dedicated his life to uncovering it. Chapter 6: The Unveiling of Shadows. The confession from Michael on the quiet dock, the chilling truth of David's murder, galvanized Evie. Her grief, once a passive, consuming force, transformed into a sharp, unyielding blade of righteous anger. David had not simply died, he had been silenced. And she, with Lily and Michael by her side, would ensure his sacrifice was not in vain. They took Michael's testimony, the original map, and the wooden totem to the Seattle Police Department. Detective Anderson, the original investigating officer on David's case, was initially skeptical, dismissing Michael's account as grief-fueled delusions. But Evie, now armed with a steel resolve, presented the evidence with a quiet dignity that brooked no dismissal. The old map, the historical context Lily provided, and Michael's raw, tearful account of David's final moments slowly chipped away at Anderson's skepticism. The key to breaking through the police's inertia came from the totem. Lily, through her research, discovered it was a specific tribal artifact, a symbol of a forgotten elder, its existence proof of the map's authenticity and its connection to the Coast Salish tribe. They contacted the tribal elders who, with cautious hope, authenticated the totem and confirmed the oral history of the stolen land, a painful narrative passed down through generations. They had suspected something, but lacked concrete proof. The map was irrefutable. The police investigation, now spurred by the compelling evidence, uncovered a shocking truth. The two men on the yacht were not random thugs. They were enforcers for a powerful old Seattle family, the Thorndikes, whose immense wealth and influence were built on the very land illegally acquired centuries ago. The Thorndikes had quietly suppressed any attempt to expose the truth, their network of legal and political connections ensuring the silence of historical records and the disappearance of troublesome individuals like Arthur Vance, and now David. The media, sensing a story of epic proportions, picked it up. Century-old land grab exposed. Wealthy family implicated in cover-up and murder. Local man died for the truth. The news spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of the city, then the nation. Public outrage was immediate and immense. The Thorndikes, cornered and exposed, faced a barrage of legal and public pressure. Though the direct murder charge was difficult to prove without further evidence or confessions, the undeniable evidence of the land fraud and the historical injustice was overwhelming. Public opinion turned against them. Evie, with Lily's constant support, became the quiet face of the movement. She spoke at community meetings, her voice steady, telling David's story, his grandfather's story, the story of the stolen land and the enduring fight for justice. She emphasized David's conviction, his unwavering belief in truth, and his ultimate sacrifice. She held up the map, the totem, symbols of a past that could no longer be denied. The tribal elders, moved by Evie's courage, formally accepted the map and the totem, acknowledging David and Arthur Vance as unsung heroes. This act brought immense pride and a profound sense of closure to Evie. David's legacy was no longer a secret burden. It was a beacon of truth, shining brightly for all to see. The case gained momentum. legal challenges mounted against the Thorndikes, demanding reparations and, more importantly, the return of the sacred land to the Coast Salish tribe. The battle was long and arduous, but the tide had turned. David's truth had finally been heard. The ritual of the two kettles, which had started as a quiet act of grief, now held a new, potent meaning. It was no longer about a yearning for his presence, but a celebration of his enduring spirit. Each Sunday, as Evie poured the water, she didn't just mourn, she celebrated David's bravery, his unwavering pursuit of justice, and the profound impact he had made on the world. Even in death, the shadows had been unveiled, and David's light, though extinguished too soon, now illuminated a path toward justice and healing for generations to come. Chapter 7: The Living Legacy. The legal battle against the Thorndike family stretched for months, a protracted struggle between entrenched power and undeniable truth. But the ground had shifted. The media attention, the unwavering support from the Coast Salish tribe, and the compelling evidence David had painstakingly uncovered, amplified by Evie's dignified resolve, slowly chipped away at the Thorndikes' defenses. In the end, facing overwhelming public pressure and the threat of severe legal repercussions, the Thorndike family agreed to a historic settlement. A significant portion of the illegally acquired land, including the sacred burial grounds and traditional fishing territories, was formally returned to the Coast Salish tribe. Additionally, a substantial endowment was established to support tribal education and cultural preservation initiatives, named in honor of Arthur Vance and David Ramsey, the two men who had fought to uncover the truth. Evie stood proudly beside the tribal elders at the repatriation ceremony, the sun glinting off the restored ancestral lands. Lily, her eyes shining with pride, stood beside her, a testament to the unexpected friendships born from shared purpose. James, once worried about his mother's isolation, now watched her with profound admiration, a quiet understanding of his father's hidden greatness. The formal apology from the city of Seattle, acknowledging the historical injustice, was a powerful moment of reckoning and healing. David's name, once synonymous with a tragic accident, was now celebrated as a hero of truth and justice. The small silver compass, the wooden totem, and the original map found in the time capsule were enshrined in a new tribal museum, symbols of a long-buried history finally brought to light. The ritual of the two kettles changed, yet again. It remained a sacred Sunday tradition, but its essence transformed. As Evie placed David's shining kettle on the stove, she no longer felt the sharp pang of raw grief or the burning sting of unanswered questions. Instead, she felt a profound sense of completion, of pride, and a quiet, enduring love. The second kettle was no longer a symbol of his absence, but a vibrant testament to his eternal presence, his living legacy. Evie's world, once small and confined by sorrow, had expanded exponentially. Lily became more than a friend. She was a kindred spirit, a honorary granddaughter, often accompanying Evie to talks and historical events related to the land repatriation. Together, they founded a small non-profit organization dedicated to uncovering forgotten historical injustices and advocating for marginalized communities. James, seeing his mother's renewed vitality and purpose, felt a deep sense of relief and quiet joy. He saw that his father's memory was not just preserved in a ritual, but lived on through the profound change they had brought about. He began to delve into his own family history, curious about the threads of courage and conviction that ran through generations. Evie often visited the restored ancestral lands, walking the paths David had so diligently researched. She felt his presence not in a ghostly echo, but in the vibrant life of the restored ecosystem, the reclaimed heritage, the flourishing spirit of the Coast Salish people. Her love for David, once confined to memory, had blossomed into a boundless compassion for the world, a dedication to truth that transcended personal loss. She had forgiven herself for not understanding David's secret sooner, knowing now that his secrecy had been an act of love, a desperate attempt to protect her from danger. And she understood, with a profound clarity, that love after death was not just about holding on to memories, but about carrying forward a legacy, living a life that honored their shared values, and transforming sorrow into purpose. The two kettles continued to steam on her stove every Sunday, not just for herself and David, but for the countless others whose stories, like the land itself, had been hidden and were now, finally, brought into the light. Her life, once defined by loss, had become a living testament to the enduring power of love, truth, and the profound, transformative journey of healing.